A miracle of the Virgin Mary happened in a place where no one expected it. Not in a church, not in a shrine, but inside a university classroom in Texas, in front of a man who had dedicated his entire life to destroying faith. A brilliant science professor who mocked every mention of the sacred would soon discover that there are forces in the universe no microscope can detect, but powerful enough to shatter even the coldest heart. Professor Dr. Richard Thompson was 52 years old. For 25 years, he had taught biological sciences at one of the most respected universities in Texas. His reputation was legendary: brilliant, demanding, merciless. His mind was sharp as a scalpel and colder than Arctic ice. But there was something about Richard that no one at the university truly understood. For 20 years, he had barely slept. Not since that December morning when he held his son's cold hands for the last time. Little Joshua had been only 8 years old. For 3 years before that moment, Richard had done something he would later spend the rest of his life trying to forget. He had prayed. Every night, every morning, every desperate moment. He had begged God for a miracle. Take me instead of him. But the miracle never came. Joshua died, and something inside Richard died with him. From that day forward, science became his only religion, and skepticism his armor. Every equation became a silent protest against heaven. Every experiment a ritual of denying the divine. In his classroom, there was no room for faith. His students had a nickname for him. They called him Professor Ice. Behind his back, of course, Richard knew about the nickname, and secretly he liked it. Ice protected. Ice did not feel pain. 10 years earlier, his wife Sarah had finally given up trying to save him. She had tried everything: conversations, prayers, therapy. But Richard had buried the man she loved together with Joshua. Now he lived alone in a minimalist apartment. He worked late into the night. His only companions were stacks of scientific books and the unbearable silence. In a locked drawer of his desk were photographs of Joshua, pictures he could not look at, but also could not throw away. His colleagues respected his intelligence, but they feared his coldness. His students learned a lot from him, but many left his classroom wondering if they truly wanted a career in science if it meant becoming like him. Then came a Tuesday afternoon in March, a completely ordinary day in Texas. And yet that day, Richard Thompson's intellectual arrogance was about to collide with a force that would make even Einstein look like a child playing with building blocks. The lecture hall was full. 42 second-year students sat silently, absorbing every word. Richard was explaining genetic mutations and their role in biological evolution. His voice was calm, precise, surgical. But then he heard it. A whisper. Third row. 2 students talking quietly. Richard stopped speaking instantly. Silence fell across the room like a blade. Slowly he turned. His cold blue eyes scanned the classroom until they landed on the source. Emma Cooper, a shy student who looked like she wished the floor would swallow her. Richard folded his arms. Miss Cooper, he said slowly, since my lecture apparently isn't interesting enough to hold your attention, perhaps you would like to share your conversation with the entire class. Emma froze. Professor, I was just... No, Richard interrupted smoothly. Please, enlighten us. I believe you were discussing a miracle. Nervous laughter spread through the room. Emma slowly stood. Her hands trembled. My grandmother was very sick, she said quietly. The doctor said she had only a few weeks left. That night, she prayed to the Virgin Mary, and the next morning, Richard laughed. It was a sharp, cold laugh. And she woke up completely cured, correct? The room fell silent. How fascinating, Richard continued. So you're telling us that the Virgin Mary, a figure who supposedly watches over the entire universe, decided to pause her cosmic responsibilities to heal your grandmother personally, while ignoring the millions of other people suffering the same fate every day. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Richard kept going. Tell me something, Miss Cooper. What criteria does God use to decide who deserves a miracle? Is it the intensity of the prayer? The purity of the heart? Or perhaps it's simply a cosmic lottery? Some students looked down. Others watched in stunned silence. Richard stepped closer. Let me explain what really happened to your grandmother. This is called spontaneous remission, a rare but well-documented medical phenomenon where diseases regress unexpectedly. It's not divine intervention. It's statistics. He paused, then spoke the words that froze the room. The Virgin Mary does not come down from heaven to heal anyone. There is no celestial entity performing surgeries in hospital rooms. For a fraction of a second, his voice cracked. If that kind of miracle truly existed. He stopped, then forced himself to finish. My son Joshua would still be alive. And he isn't. Because miracles are just stories we tell ourselves when reality is too painful to accept. No one spoke. Emma was crying silently. Richard turned back to the board. As I was saying, genetic mutations and adaptive evolution. But no one was listening anymore. Something had shifted in the room. Something invisible. Something none of them could explain. And Richard Thompson had no idea that every word of mockery had been heard by someone. Someone who, that very night, would come to answer him. Because when someone challenges heaven publicly, heaven sometimes responds. Very personally. 9:47 p.m. The university building was empty. Security lights cast long shadows across the hallways. Richard sat alone in his office. The room looked exactly like him. Sterile. White walls. Metal desk. Stacks of exams. No photographs. No plants. No personal objects. Just work. He was grading papers when something strange happened. For the first time in years, Richard felt warmth. Not the dry heat of the building's heater. Something different. Something softer. Something that seemed to surround him like an invisible embrace. Richard frowned and looked up. Probably a ventilation issue. But then he noticed something else. A fragrance. Roses. Fresh roses. He froze. That was impossible. The building had been closed for hours. Slowly he stood up, scanning the empty office. The scent was real. Strong. Unmistakable. And somehow, it seemed to be coming from nowhere. At first, Richard tries to explain the scent logically. Maybe someone left flowers somewhere. Maybe it's a new cleaning product. Maybe the ventilation system is circulating air from another room. He walks to the window. Outside, the parking lot lies empty and dark beneath the Texas night. No cars. No people. Only silence. He turns toward the door. Closed. The hallway beyond it is quiet. But the fragrance grows stronger. Fresh roses. Impossible. Then Richard feels something that shakes every fiber of his scientific mind. A presence. Not imagination. Not exhaustion. Not stress. Something real. Someone is in the room with him, even though he cannot see anyone. Slowly, with a heartbeat that defies every rule of rational thought, Richard turns. And suddenly, she is there. Not a shadow. Not a reflection. Not a hallucination born from fatigue. A woman. Real. Solid. Standing a few feet away from him. She breathes the same air. She casts a faint shadow on the floor. She wears a mantle of deep blue that seems to capture a mysterious light. Beneath it, a white tunic glows softly, as if it were woven from moonlight itself. But it is her face that shatters every defense Richard has built over 20 years. She appears young, yet her eyes hold the wisdom of someone who has watched the entire history of humanity unfold. Her beauty is not the kind that dazzles. It is the kind that reminds you what purity looks like, what goodness feels like, what unconditional love truly means. And her eyes, God, her eyes, deep brown, like rich fertile earth, filled with such compassion that Richard feels as if every wound in his life, every moment of grief, every hidden tear is being seen, understood, and loved. It is the gaze of a mother who has lost a child, a mother who understands. Richard tries to stand. His legs fail. He tries to speak, to formulate some rational explanation, some hypothesis his mind can grasp. But no words come. For the first time in 20 years, Richard Thompson begins to cry. Not polite tears. Not controlled emotion. These are deep, primal sobs rising from a place he sealed shut long ago. They are the tears he never shed at Joshua's funeral because he had to stay strong for Sarah. They are the tears he swallowed during his divorce because crying would have meant admitting he was still human. The Virgin Mary walks toward him. Her steps make no sound on the cold floor. Yet Richard feels every movement like waves of warmth spreading through the room. She stops in front of him, and Richard sees that tears fill her eyes too. Tears for him. Tears for Joshua. Tears for every lost child. Every grieving mother. Every broken soul that turned pain into bitterness. Without speaking a word, she lifts her hand and places it gently on Richard's chest, exactly where the pain has burned for 20 years, exactly where he built his armor of ice. The touch is real, warm, soft as silk, yet strong as stone, and something impossible happens. The pain does not disappear, But it changes. It becomes lighter, sacred, bearable. Then a voice fills his soul, not in the air, not echoing off the walls. It comes from deep within him, as if she is speaking directly to the part of him that never died, only hid. Richard, my beloved son, your Joshua never left you. You did not lose your faith. You only buried it beneath anger so that waiting would not hurt so much. The voice is music. It is what love would sound like if it had a melody. And suddenly Richard sees something. A vision. Not memory. Not hallucination. A gift. Beside the Virgin Mary appears a boy. Joshua. But not the sick child lying in a hospital bed. He is radiant. Healthy. Filled with light. Joshua smiles. The same smile Richard believed he had forgotten, but which had lived quietly inside his heart all these years. And in the vision, Joshua speaks. Daddy, don't cry for me. I'm with Christ. This lady welcomed me from the very first moment. She never left me alone. She waited until you were ready to understand. Love never dies. It lives in God. And I always knew you loved me. Richard collapses. He falls to his knees on the cold classroom floor. 20 years of buried grief erupts in sobs that echo through the empty building. He cries for the day Joshua died, for the marriage he destroyed, for the years of loneliness he chose as punishment, for every student he hurt with his cruelty, for Emma, for every person whose faith he tried to break. And as he cries, he feels something surrounding him, not physical arms, something stronger, the presence of the Virgin Mary, and Joshua near him, closer than he had felt in 20 years. Eventually the sobs fade. Richard lifts his head, but the miracle is not over. It is only beginning. Because what happened that night would transform not only the life of one broken man, but the lives of everyone who would witness what came next. Monday morning, 7:30 a.m. Students enter the classroom expecting the same Professor Thompson they have always known. Cold, relentless, unapproachable. But something is different. Richard stands at the front of the room, and something in his eyes has changed. A softness, a warmth, as if someone had turned on a light in a house that had been dark for years. Emma Cooper enters quietly. She sits in the last row, hoping to remain invisible after the humiliation of the previous lecture. But before beginning the lesson, Richard stops. He looks directly at her. Miss Cooper, could I speak with you for a moment before class begins? The room grows tense. Students exchange worried glances. Is he going to humiliate her again? Emma walks toward the desk slowly. Her hands tremble. Richard lowers his voice so only she can hear. I've been thinking about our conversation last week. Your grandmother, did she truly recover completely? Emma blinks in surprise. Yes, Professor. The doctors said they can't explain it. She's at home cooking for the whole family again. Richard closes his eyes briefly. When he opens them again, Emma thinks she sees tears. Then perhaps, he says softly, perhaps I was too quick to dismiss your story. Maybe there are forces in this universe that our instruments cannot measure, and that does not make them any less real. Emma is speechless. This is not the same man. Professor, are you okay? Richard smiles. Not the sarcastic smile his students know. A real one. I'm better than I've been in a very long time. And Emma, I owe you an apology. You didn't deserve what I said to you. Your faith is precious. Don't let anyone, especially not a bitter man like I once was, take it from you. Emma returns to her seat in stunned silence. The rest of the class senses something has changed. They just don't know what. Yet, the class continues. Professor Thompson still teaches with the same brilliance. His explanations are still precise. His logic still sharp. His expectations still high. But something has changed. When a student raises a hand and asks about the limits of science, Richard pauses for a moment before answering. In the past, the question would have been met with sarcasm. This time, it isn't. Science, Richard says calmly, is one of the most extraordinary tools humanity has ever developed to understand the physical universe. He slowly walks across the classroom, but it would be arrogance on our part to believe that it is the only tool that exists. The students exchange surprised glances. There are mysteries in this universe, he continues, that may never be solved inside a laboratory. He looks around the room. And you know what? That's perfectly all right. The silence in the classroom feels different now. Not tense. Reflective. Many of the students stare at him, bewildered. Who is this man? And what happened to Professor Thompson? 3 months pass. Richard still lives alone. But his apartment is no longer the cold mausoleum it once was. Where silence once ruled, there is now life. Green plants sit near the windows, softening the sterile walls. Sunlight fills the rooms that were once permanently dark. On a small table rests a simple statue of the Virgin Mary. And on the walls, photographs of Joshua, not hidden anymore, not locked away in drawers. They are displayed openly now, not as painful reminders, but as proof that love never truly dies. Richard and Sarah have not fully reconciled. Perhaps they never will. But one evening he made the call. A long call. A sincere apology for years of coldness. For the distance. For the silence. And for the man he became after Joshua died. He told her something else too. That Joshua would be proud of the strength she showed when everything collapsed. It was not the end of their wounds, but it was the first step toward healing them. At the university, Richard's reputation remains intact. He is still demanding, still brilliant, still one of the most respected professors on campus. But now his students feel something different. Respect has been joined by affection. When Richard notices a student struggling, he doesn't ignore it. He reaches out, sometimes with advice, sometimes with patience, sometimes with something as simple as listening. The man they once called Professor Ice is gone. In his place stands something far more powerful. A teacher who has learned how to unite knowledge with compassion, science with humility, mind with heart. Every night before going to sleep, Richard takes a small photograph of Joshua from the bedside table. He holds it gently and whispers the same words. "Good night, my boy. Daddy loves you." Then he looks toward the small statue of the Virgin Mary beside the bed. "And thank you for never giving up on me." Sometimes, only sometimes, when the night is very still, the fragrance of roses quietly fills the room, and Richard smiles softly in the darkness. I know you're here. If you are listening to this story thinking it sounds impossible, that miracles don't happen inside universities, that the Virgin Mary would never appear to a professor hardened by grief, then perhaps you have not yet understood the deepest truth about divine love. She does not appear only to saints. She does not visit only those who already believe. Very often, she seeks out the most wounded hearts, the most distant souls, those who have walked the farthest from hope. Richard Thompson was perhaps the most unlikely man in the world to receive a heavenly visitation. A skeptic, a man armored against faith, a man who turned grief into bitterness. And yet, he was precisely the one chosen. Because if a miracle could reach a heart like his, then it can reach anyone. It can reach the neighbor who laughs at prayer, the scientist who calls faith superstition, the person listening to this story right now. Yes, even you. Let us finish with a brief prayer. Virgin Mary, Mother of God and our Mother, today we lift our hearts to you. You who know the deepest sorrows of the human heart. You who stood beside your Son at the cross. Look upon us with that same compassion. Comfort those who have lost someone they love. Embrace those who live in loneliness and grief. Teach us that love never dies, because in God, love lives forever. Beloved Mother, we thank you, because even when we drift far from faith, even when our hearts grow cold, you never give up on us. You continue to pray for us, to guide us gently back to your Son, Jesus. Protect every family that suffers. Restore hope to those who feel lost, and fill our homes with peace, faith, and new life. Let us always toward Christ, where forgiveness, strength, and eternal love are found. And when our own hour comes, may we hear your comforting voice reminding us, love never gives up, hope never dies, and in God, everything is restored. Amen. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen today? Write your answer in the comments, or share your own testimony of faith, because sometimes a single story, a single comment, can bring hope to someone who needs it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement today. May Our Lady intercede for you and your family, and may peace always live in your home.